Welcome, everyone, to Color Commentary. We are your pauper commentators, Michael Petchick and Adrian Guarzales. How's it going, Adrian?
Well, sassy and a little bit Tabasky. How are you, Mike?
I'm doing all right. Still on the job hunt, but it's beautiful weather. I'm shortly going to be in sunny California, relaxing and not doing anything.
Wait. You're going to California? You go there an awful lot for someone who hates California.
Yeah, we've covered this before. I have a disdain for certain aspects of California, but
Longboards. He hates longboards.
I hate longboards, and In-N-Out is not better than Whataburger.
Thank you, Mike. Bless. All right. Sorry. Go ahead.
All right. So top of the show, we got to take care of some upkeep stuff. The usual good, excellent shilling that we do at the top of every show. And we're going to start things off with Original Magic Art. OriginalMagicArt.com is the source for neat little dice bags, tokens, playmats, and art prints from throughout the history of Magic. They have a great variety of products that, you know, they run the gamut. If we're going to be honest here, they've got currently top of the list. They've got these really sweet playmats that are maps of Dominaria and Ixalan. They have the very sweet Recurring Nightmare playmat that I'm very deeply tempted by. They've got Walking Ballista playmat. That's your jam, right, Adrian?
Yes.
And yeah, they make a ton of great products. They have the general orders for Relics of Wizardry, these cool little metallic tokens. But if any of this sounds like it's something that's up your alley, and you go there and you want to buy some stuff, you can use the affiliate code Commontary, spelled as it is in the name of this podcast, in all caps, and you will receive 5% off, and we get a little bit of a kickback. So you're helping support the show, you're getting yourself a little bit of a discount. Win-win all around. One last time, that code is Commontary, all caps, spelled as it is in the name of this podcast. What do you have for us, Adrian?
Well, I don't know if you're all aware, but we have a patron. For just $1 an episode, you too can hear the full show, including the pre- and post shows, as well as getting access to our patron-exclusive Discord. I think the topic today was the legacy list I'm going to be playing in GP Richmond. So you could have known about that.
Yeah, there's all sorts of neat little discussions and plenty of jokes about centaurs. Just all around great.
Yeah. So for today's discussion topic, we are going to be discussing the results, the top 8, I should say, of Paupergeddon 2018, a big pauper tournament, 192 people, that takes place, and I am going to say this wrong, Firenze, Italy.
I think it might be Firenze, but I don't know. I don't speak Italian, and I have never heard it out loud.
Yeah, apologies to our Italian listeners if you're listening. So Paupergeddon, a little bit of background, it's kind of a big deal.
I mean, there were 192 people at this thing. I would qualify that as a big deal when, like, the Channel Fireball thing, I think, was around 200, I heard, and SCG Con had the Pauper Classic maxing out at, like, 160. Like,
it's a big event. Here in America, we have Rags to Riches, which I do have some problems with, but we won't discuss them now. But Paupergeddon is a tournament that has been occurring for some time in Italy, and I unfortunately don't know a lot of the specifics around it. The site is unfortunately in Italian. If you're interested in checking it out, maybe you can read Italian or speak Italian. It's magictitans.it, so I would assume that Magic Titans is the store that puts this on.
Yeah, and they do also, for what it's worth, have a YouTube channel. Again, it is all in Italian, so unless Italian is a language that you're really comfortable with, it might not be super accessible, but they do upload videos of the tournament, and there is commentary provided as well. But yeah, it's pretty neat. And they've been doing this, I believe this is the 5th one?
I honestly don't know, so I apologize for my ignorance.
Regardless, this is one of the biggest routine pauper tournaments, so we've kind of got to cover it. We kind of got to talk about this.
And we have it in the past to our detriment and to your detriment as well, because I was looking at the list today and they're freaking sweet. Obviously, European metas are different. If any of you go to big American tournaments, you may have heard people joking about that before, but APAC players like control decks, stuff like that. In Europe, I think control decks are also pretty popular. But it's pretty great to see how metagames from overseas go. And so I just want to jump right in. They posted a top 8 list. I don't really know who won based on these lists, is the other unfortunate thing. But I'm going to assume this first list, which is a Boros Monarch list, was the winner just because it's at the top.
And you were really excited when you saw this. You were like, "Wow, this is some spicy tech." So I think rather than covering everything that's in the list, how about you take us through what differentiates this from a majority of the lists you'd see online on the MitGo results?
Really, Mike and I were talking about this. We were talking about a little this with the Float 2 Gush group. That's the Austin Pauper group. And we noticed that a lot of these decks seem like they have pre-sideboarded just across the board. So with this Boros Monarch list in particular, I'm just going to go ahead and go over all the cards. We got 4 Ancient Dens, normal, 3 Boros Garrisons, sure. 4 Great Furnaces, again, normal. 1 Mortuary Mire. I haven't really been a big fan of the Black Splash in the Boros Monarch list, but I'm coming around to it. Very expensive, and in this list, it seems to be playing the role of Palace Sentinels. Again, I know a lot of decks are getting away from 4 copies, but as a curve topper, as a way of rebuying maybe 1 card in the deck that you really need back in, it's pretty strong. And then here we go with 2 Electrickeries. So on Magic Online, it's not uncommon for these lists to be playing at least 1 Electrickery in the main because it pre-sideboards you versus Delver, which is one of the most popular decks online. So I think that's just a great tournament read here. And as I go through this list, I think you'll agree with me that it seems like this Boros player had just really downloaded, what the metagame was going to be. What else? Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, yeah, I think that's one of the really interesting things about a decent chunk of these lists is there seem to be meta-specific calls in them that are significant deviations from the norm.
And call that what you will, but I think no matter where you play Magic, this will eventually occur.
Yeah, it's just kind of a progression, and especially, if you've been testing with people or, have some reason to believe that there's going to be a specific metagame slant, or you just really want to shore up some matchups because 192 people is gonna be a lot of rounds, so
it's a pretty
you might
open field.
Yeah,
but Electrickery is not only good against Delver, it's also really good against other decks like Elves, for example. So I think 2 in the main is, I would only run 1 personally, but it appears to be the right call, and there are definitely games where Electrickery is just going to win you the game. It's such a strong spell in Pauper. Following that, 4 copies Galblast, sure. 3 copies Glinthawk, that's 1 less than I play. And here's a good one. 2 copies Guardian of the Guild Pact, which I just think is so sweet. That's the protection from monocolored 2/3. It's essentially true name Nemesis in our format because most removal in the heavily played decks is monocolored. Your Terminates, your Unmakes, those are much rarer in the format. So I really like these 2 as an inclusion as a way of helping close out the game.
And I think between that and the Electrickeries, this definitely points towards a player who has sort of pre-boarded, if you will, for the blue-red Delver matchup in specific.
Right, because Delver can't get rid of this creature once it's resolved.
Yeah, it's just gonna stick. They're not gonna be. I guess they can block it with this. Oh no, that's right. They don't play the Spire Golems in that.
It's also incidentally very good, and maybe this is even the reason. It's very good against Spellstutter Sprite. 4 mana is a lot of mana for Spellstutter. Generally 1 or 2 is a sweet spot for those. And then so you have to actually use Counterspell in order to not have this happen. So I would really like that. I really like that. Counterspells, I've been playing a lot of Is It Delver lately. Counterspells are a huge premium. So if you have to leave up UU, or if you have to use one and then later they get to resolve something even better, that's tough.
Yeah.
We've also got 2 copies of Journey to Nowhere, 4 copies Core Skyfisher, 4 copies Lightning Bolt, 4 copies Palace Sentinels, 1 main deck Prismatic Strands, that's pretty regular in my opinion, 4 copies Prophetic Prism, 1 main deck copy of Reaping the Graves. So that's where our black mana comes into play. Again, not the biggest fan of Mortuary Mire and cards like it, although I do believe that you can set up an infinite Skyfisher loop with it. Mortuary Mire the Skyfisher back to your hand, Skyfisher dies.
Yep.
Oh no. Yeah. You see what I'm saying. So Reaping the Graves is also pretty strong. That strikes me as a very, it's a very late game card, and I have seen it in the sideboard, but never in the main deck. We've also got one copy of Relic of Progenitus. So either this player is very worried about the Tron matchup, rightfully so, that matchup's very difficult, and both of these cards will help there, or they're very concerned about like blue-black control or very removal-heavy decks. And then 4 copies of Thraben Inspector. Noticeably absent, no copies of Battle Screech.
Yeah, just kind of moving away from that token-based plan. And here's the thing. Here's the real next level. If they were counting on there being some amount of Tron and also potentially taking that next step of saying, if I'm playing Electrickery, why won't other Boros players? I think that could in some ways be a hedge, because there's nothing in here that dies to Electrickery. And
Yeah.
I think that's like a really important note to hit here is I think that this may be if it's good enough for me to run 2 Electrickery's main deck, I have to assume that other players will play similarly, if that's the correct metagame call. So I think that by removing Battle Screech, you're hopefully leaving your opponent with 2 dead cards, and in a mirror where if they run Battle Screech and they don't make that next level leap, you're going to be able to have this sort of form of card advantage in the fact that they're playing dead cards in their main deck. So I kind of really dig this. I'm not as big a fan, though, of the Relic of Progenitus main deck. That just seems a little dodgy to me because, like, worst case scenario, this is a 2-mana cycle, and I'm not super thrilled about that in this deck in particular.
Speaking of cyclers, no cyclers in this deck. No, none of the cycling lands. I would like to talk a little bit more about Guardian of the Guild Pact. I like that card quite a bit. Not only does it ensure that you will almost always be the Monarch, because it's you can very easily get in for 2, get the Monarch back if you lose it. It's also extremely good against. It's also extremely good at keeping the Monarch, right? Because it's just like this wall that a lot of creatures won't be able to get through.
Yeah, I do like that. And looking at the sideboard's actually pretty tame in terms of sort of leaps being made. There's nothing here that's really that shocking.
It seems pretty normal. 1 Ancient Grudge, 1 Cop Red, 2 Coalition Honor Guard. I think lately that has a little bit more of a premium, again, in keeping with your idea of not being dead to Electrickery. Coalition Honor Guard's a 2/4, even though it costs more mana. 2 copies Gorilla Shaman, maybe had some affinity to worry about. That's actually not very common online anymore. 2 copies Clark Clan Shaman, help shore up some of those other tiny matchups, although I don't think Boros really needs it, honestly. 1 copy Prismatic Strands, 4 copies Pyroblast, 1 copy Ray Revelation, 1 copy Relic Progenitus.
Yeah, and so I'm looking through this whole list, and I've got to imagine, just kind of glancing at this, we've got the Cop Red and the Gorilla Shamans. That kind of, to me, points towards heavy hedging against affinity. Just seeing Cop Red's a good answer to Fling. It's a good answer to just ATOG with Battle Rage or an unblocked ATOG. It definitely feels like this deck has been tuned a little bit more towards answering specific decks that could present a problem for Monarch.
Yeah. Why don't you lead the? You want to talk about the next one? Or do you want me to?
The next one's not, deeply spicy or anything. It's Tron. Like, at the end of the day, that's what it is. It's Barasatron. It's got your standard shell of most of the things that you'd expect. It does have some spicy includes. We've got like Electrostatic Bolt in here, which is red for an instant. It deals 2 damage to a creature. If it's an artifact creature, it does 4 instead.
Hey, maybe affinity is a big problem in Italy,
Yeah. That was not to spoil things, but I did kind of peek ahead and see that and go, maybe there's something here, because we're also seeing 2 Flame Slash, which is pretty stock, but we're also seeing a Forbidden Alchemy. There's not anything super spicy in this one. Just kind of the typical things that you might expect out of this list, and I mean the deck puts in work. Again, Electrostatic Bolt points towards a larger affinity share of the metagame, especially in the main deck, because I'm looking and they didn't put any in the sideboard. So I've got to imagine that's again trying to pre-board for this matchup.
The other thing I'd like to talk about with this list, you might notice Mike, that the Stonehorn Dignitary is in the sideboard, not the main deck. So this Marasa, and Tron lists very, very heavily. I think that they might be one of the most customizable lists in the format right now, really based on metagame, pilot preference, that sort of thing, because it's all about having answers. At the end of the day, though, this deck's playing 4 Mole Drifters, Pulse of Marasa itself, and then it's also trying to get in with Mnemonic Wall, and
It's got Moments Piece in there to create like a soft lock.
I don't see Denrova Horror in this list. Am I missing it?
There's no Denrova Horror. It's got the Rolling Thunders as I believe a single copy of Rolling Thunder as its main win con.
Well, it's interesting to me that in the board you have only 1 copy of Stonehorn Dignitary. So this list at the end of the day is going to try and win with Muldrifter plus Rolling Thunder way later in the game. It looks like.
Yeah. And again, like very, very minimal. Like this deck is mostly 1 and 2 ofs with 4 ofs the very necessary things. One thing that is pretty interesting is seeing it go up to 2 islands. That's kind of a little out of the usual, and down to only 1 Thornwood Falls. Just minor tweaks here. Nothing, blowing it out of the water. And how about you tell us a little bit about the blue-white tribe list here, because Tireless Tribe is not something I have a lot of experience with, and you talked to someone who does have experience with this deck, and he had some opinions on it.
Look, I'm not going to say Team Float 2 Gush is the next big thing, because it is. Wait. Anyway, I was talking to another member of our squad. He is a blue-white tribe pilot, and I definitely wanted his opinion on the list. He said it's weird. He said it's very, very strange. Most lists online are not running this exact configuration. And let me just go ahead and go over it. 1 copy Augur of Bolus in this list. If we compare it to the most, sorry, I should have had Goldfish pulled up already. I would like to compare it to an existing, the latest 5.0 list to Inside Out combo, the latest Inside Out combo list to do well, which looks like was in SCG Classic Roanoke, so another paper tournament. Interesting, great that I'm doing that. 3 copies Augur of Bolus instead compared to this list's merely 1. So already that's interesting, because you can instantly win off Augur of Bolus. You can sometimes Inside Out it to be a 3-1, and that also helps you dig.
Yeah.
Also interesting to me, 1 copy Cartouche of Knowledge in the main.
I'll return to one of our previous talking points. Electrickery in the main board. This does let you have 1 more out to Electrickery, and I do like that for what it's worth. Like just having a way to deal with that, and also just drawing a card.
So that was pretty interesting to me. 1 copy Gigadrouse in the main. It looks like the Roanoke list is running that as well, but our friend made it sound like that wasn't really normal. 2 copies of Impulse, typically seen in Tron lists, not typically seen in Blue Eye, Inside Out combo. So that's pretty interesting as well. 1 copy Repeal. Again, just kind of weird, like there's just these weird 1 and 2 ofs in the list that aren't part of really what I would consider to be the stock list online. So just some very interesting teching going on here. I don't even know what repeal it could be for. I guess it's to repeal your own tribe, but if you have to repeal your own tribe, it seems like you've lost. And then I don't know. At its best, you can repeal something, draw a card. I just really don't know what you're using this for.
It could just be there to get blockers out of the way. Again, it could be used defensively. It could also be for the mirror. It's cheap interaction, and in that mirror, I feel like since it so heavily depends on who goes off first, because if you go off first and it fizzles, your opponent is going to get a chance to go off the next turn. So I feel like it's a little bit of a hedge that allows them to get a bit of an edge in that specific matchup. I don't know. I like Impulse in this list for what it's worth. Impulse is one of the more powerful spells when you need to dig to a specific card. So I do very much like that, especially because Impulse is going to find you stuff like Gush, which is probably the most powerful card in this deck. So
yes, We've also go ahead. Sorry,
I was just going to say I really like that as an inclusion in this type of deck.
Yeah, we've also got 4 additional fetch lands. There are 4 Terramorphic Expanses. It looks like most of the lists online are only running maybe 4 to 6 fetches, Ash Barrens, and then Evolving Wilds. But this is playing some extras, so that's pretty interesting. Also, the sideboard is not going the transformative route. I don't know how common that actually is, but we've got 1 Cartouche of Knowledge again in the board, 2 copies Deep Analysis, 3 copies Gut Shot. I wonder again if that's for the mirror. 3 copies Hydroblast, 3 copies Journey to Nowhere, 3 copies Prismatic Strands. So it's a very, very broad stroke sideboard, but I imagine with this deck, you generally have an idea of like, well, this is really good and this is really bad, as opposed to like a more toolbox sideboard like the Boros list might have, where they really just need 1 or 2 cards to help shore up matchups. This is, I'm going to be cutting whole swaths of my deck out in order to play something else.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting, different take on this. Next up, we've got another Morosatron list, and this one has a couple of minor tweaks. It's got a cycling land in there. It leans a little bit more heavily into tap lands, and it is running that ever so spicy 1 of crop rotation to help get Tron online. But this list, again, like, it's within kind of that margin of error that most Morosatron lists are. Again, trying to win with Rolling Thunder or Muldrifters just bashing in. This one does have the very nice addition of Fangren Marauder on the board. Again, it just, like... Tell the folks at home, Adrian, how difficult is it for Affinity to deal with a Fangren Marauder?
I mean, it's basically impossible to win. You can't really kill it. You can't ATOG combo it. Every time they kill one of your artifact creatures, they gain life. It's really miserable. It's almost always a game over, or you have to 2-for-1 yourself or something.
Yeah, it's just real solid. Now this next tribe list, I'm not seeing much different with this one.
It's actually pretty different. Sorry, that made me sound really condescending. I was just like reviewing them. 3 copies Terramorphic, 2 less copies Dispel, a full 4 copies of Gigadrouse in the main. We still have the Impulses. The sideboard is different. We have an Echoing Truth, 3 Gut Shots, the 4 Hydroplasts, 4 Piracy Charms, and then 2 Prismatic Strands. So I actually do like Piracy Charm here. It's a very modal spell. You can give your tribe guy Island Walk. You can kill Delvers. You can get rid of cards out of your opponent's hand. So pretty interesting. No cartouches. Want to point that out. 2 Gataxian Probes. The other list had 0, which is also kind of interesting. So just it seems like it's a little bit more proactive in a way, I want to say. The other deck had 1 more Shadow Rift. Sorry, go ahead.
I can see that. The 4 of Gigadrouse in the main board seems a little much to me, but it clearly worked out in their favor.
That's a lot of Gigadrouse. And also one thing that's missing is Dizzy Spell, which is typically a tutor in the deck in order to help find Tribe. And when you're playing this many extra 1-drops, it is kind of, you're playing 4 Gigadrouse, which I imagine you would want before you combo. It is kind of interesting that you don't have a way of tutoring a Gigadrouse if you want it.
Yeah, it is a little odd. Next on the list, we've got Blue-Black Alchemy. And again, this is within sort of the realm of what you'd expect from this. It is running, the Evenkar's Justice. Again, if you're expecting a bunch of smaller creatures out there, this feels like a solid pickup for the deck. Nothing here really standing out too much. They are on the probe plan. Late game, just get your opponent with this Mind Rot / I guess I don't know what probe is. You draw 3 and then discard 2. I feel like that's a Magic card already, but I don't know the name of it. But yeah, we're looking at 4 Gurmag Anglers, 4 Augurs, 3 Muldrifters is your way to close out the game, and then just a pile of removal encounters. So this is pretty stock. It does have the slightly spicy 1 of Thorn of the Black Rose in the sideboard for those control matchups. And apart from that, it's pretty much what you'd expect from this deck.
Well, I like them spicy, Mike.
Yeah, you do.
Going to the next list, we got another Boros Monarch list. So for those at home, that's 2 Tribe lists, 2 Monarch lists, no Delver lists. And I'm going to go ahead and spoil it. We are not going to get a Delver list out of this top 8. This one, instead of playing the Mortuary Mire, has a main deck Bajuka Bog. Pretty interesting. Playing the 4 copies Windscarred Crag, again with the 2 copies of main deck like Trickery, but this one is playing Battle Screech over the Guardians of the Guild Pact. We also have 2 copies of Prismatic Strands in the main, which, we didn't really mention it earlier, is very, very good against opponents' Electrickeries. So, 1 extra copy of Journey to Nowhere. Pretty similar lists. It is interesting to me that both of them have the 2 main deck Electrickeries. I would think that might be more of a spicy type inclusion, but it looks like, that wasn't the only player with that on the mind. In the sideboard, we have 1 copy Cop Green, an extra copy of Electrickery, 3 copies of Gorilla Shaman, which is a lot, 2 copies Core Sanctifier, not a lot of artifacts getting through this deck, 3 copies Pyroblast, we have our Reaping the Graves, 2 copies Relic, all 3 of those cards in the sideboard where they might belong, and then instead of running the 2/4 Coalition Honor Guard, we have 2 copies of Standard Bearer.
Yeah, this is looking a little bit closer to the stock list. I'm not sure what the hedge with Bojuka Bog was. The sorcery speed of it does give you some downside, and I do like the grindiness of Mortuary Mire, but I guess it does a fine job.
I think where Bog is good, it's just incidentally really, really good. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But when it's not good, it's just like a tapped colorless land you have to play.
Yeah, and the lack of inclusion of main deck black spells does just reduce its utility a little bit more. The fact that there isn't that main deck Reaping the Graves does kind of sting a little bit here.
Well, it also does not combo with your creatures.
And yeah, rounding out the top 8, we've got the 1 rogue list in here. We've got green-white Slivers, and it's playing pretty much what you'd expect in terms of lands. We've got the 4 obligatory gain lands, some basics, a Secluded Steppe, a couple Tranquil Thickets. And then one of the exciting things, they've got 4 copies of Adventurous Impulse, which, for those who may not have played Dominaria Limited, is a green mana for a sorcery. Look at the top 3 cards of your library. You may reveal a creature or land card from among them and put it into your hand. And given that there are a total of 8, or actually 12, sorry, these lists aren't sorted by card type, which is a little bit frustrating. There's 12 total cards in here that are misses, and the rest are all hits, and a good chunk of them are pretty solid hits. And I'm noticing even this 1 copy main deck Standard Bearer, and I'm kind of curious, what do you think that is in there for? Because obviously Slivers pays a very real cost when it runs non-sliver creatures. So what matchup are you thinking that this comes in for?
I think the one in the main is to mostly protect your own slivers. There are some folks who've been tinkering around with Adventurous Impulse and Lead the Stampede with some success. So this might have taken a cue from Moto. But the Standard Bearer is definitely the spicy include here for me. And like I said, I really do think it's in here to protect your slivers. You'll notice all of them are currently at 4 copies, so it's not like they shaved anything. In fact, I think the one they're not playing in order to play all these non-slivers is the Vigilance one.
Yes,
I don't see it anywhere, but I think that one's kind of optional anyway.
Yeah, that was always kind of a maybe you include it, maybe you don't sort of situation. And I definitely think that if you're going to trim that and start running like Lead the Stampede and a Standard Bearer that can help out against those removal heavy matchups, at least the targeted removal matchups, that is good, because once Slivers gets to a certain density of lords and protective effects, it does do a pretty good job of just running away with the game. And there are 4 copies Vines of Vastwood to kind of back that plan up.
And then 4 copies of Mutagenic.
Yeah, so we've got a decent density of ways to protect your threats here. And apart from that, it's pretty much just what you'd expect from Slivers. It runs a lot of Lord effects, and it runs a lot of things that make your Slivers better. That's kind of how this deck has always functioned, and, I'm glad to see something in the top 8 be a little bit outside of the usual realm of what we'd expect. So I guess, what are your thoughts on seeing this top 8 as a whole? Especially the fact that we're missing Delver, we're missing Stompy. I guess actually we're missing both versions of Delver at that. Affinity is nowhere to be seen. Elves is nowhere to be seen. Those are 4 decks that play pretty routinely into the metagame.
I think that we got to take a leaf out of Kendra's book here. Pauper is full. Pauper is mostly a rotating metagame. Any of the tier decks, I think this shows us has a chance of top 8ing a tournament, if not winning it outright. There are some decks on here that you and I have dismissed in the past, like Blue Black Alchemy sitting here in the top 8, Sliver sitting here in the top 8. I think really it comes down to, it's a lot like Legacy. The format's probably a lot more open than people give it credit for, and as long as you know your deck and you know the metagame, you can do very well at a large open tournament like this.
Yeah, and I think we're also seeing, like, in a lot of these top performing lists that pre-sideboarding that we've talked about does seem to bear out with the types of decks we're not seeing in this top 8. We're not seeing Elves, which is weak to Trickery game 1. We're not seeing,
Yeah, unfortunately, without the full 192 lists, we have no idea what the percentage of the metagames were at this point. This might just be the list that we're tuned to beat the meta, but I like it. I think it's a solid top 8. Maybe not as diverse as all top 8s, but I think most of the major groups are represented here with really just, is it Delver the boogeyman of the format, nowhere to be seen.
Yeah, and I do think that is interesting in that it shows, like, none of these decks, we do want to acknowledge the fact that they are kind of pre-sideboarded, none of them have done so in a way that really damages their core game plan that much.
It doesn't feel like parasitic pre-sideboarding.
Yeah, it's just people making minor adjustments in, like, it's less than 5 cards total, and none of these are super, super narrow hate cards. Like, there's a decent chunk of decks where Trickery has a purpose. There's a decent chunk of decks where Relic of Progenitus is going to matter. So I think that seeing these alterations isn't indicative of, like, a sort of incestuous metagame where everything's so known because it's so predictable. I think in this case it more points towards a metagame where someone made good calls that didn't subtract for the games where those cards didn't matter. They didn't subtract enough of a win percentage to actually really matter, but in the matchups where they do matter, they mattered a lot. So I think that's really interesting. I do really like Guardian of the Guild Pact in that Boros list. I do think that that's a really solid call, just in terms of a lot of decks having a really hard time interacting with that thing outside of edict effects, and you've got plenty of cheap creatures to pair with it. So I'm glad to see this thing finally, kind of getting some play in the great scheme of things.
Me too. It's sweet.
And yeah, I do like Reaping the Graves. Like, I'm just going to come out and say it. I think that that's actually a really solid inclusion, because Boros has a tendency at some points to kind of spin its wheels, and just being able to cast this, even if it's just for 2 or 3, and get back a pile of stuff is really, really nice. Especially if your opponent, like, taps out to counter something, you get this in response, and there's at least 3 copies of it going on the stack. That seems like good value for me. All right.
I agree.
Anything else for this wonderful top 8 list?
I think we should go on to our question.
All right. So we had a listener who we both actually know in real life. This is an actual friend of the show, Josiah from Austin, who wrote in, and I'm gonna perhaps skim through this question. There's 2 paragraphs here. Don't want to take up too much time with it, but hey guys, I have a question about the perception of Pauper as a format. While looking through Chaos Draft stuff for playables, I heard the same sentiment from several people over the course of 20 minutes or so. Quote, you could build a Pauper deck from this. This sentiment seems common around a lot of people that don't play the format. It seems to me that the perception of Pauper is a format of draft, chaff, commons that anyone can just throw together. My concern is that this is because of this false conclusion. Many people that would enjoy the format don't play it because they don't understand how complex and interactive the format actually is, and that we don't just throw together some draft leftovers and play Magic. How do we as a community overcome this perception and grow the format? How do you guys personally respond to these kinds of comments?
Well, Josiah, I will say I haven't seen you in F&M in a while, so no, I'm kidding. I mean, this is an old question, right? How do we get over some of the stigmas surrounding the format? It's a joke. Oh, they only play commons. Oh, it's whatever. I think the biggest steps that we have had to take as a format in order to solve these questions have already started to become addressed. Channel Fireball and Star City Games having huge side events for Pauper does wonders to boost the legitimacy of the format. That's why one of the other common digs I see is Pauper next Tiny Leaders, and it's like, well, no, Pauper is a WotC recognized format in a way that Frontier and Tiny Leaders are not. There are Pauper tournaments. You can play in a Pauper challenge on Moto. You can play in Pauper leagues on Moto. I don't see that happening for any of these other sort of flash in the pan formats. Pauper's been around a lot longer, but all this is stuff that you as the Pauper player know. You know. You know we're not like these other formats. You know that we have some muscle and some weight behind what we do. I think the biggest thing is you got to be like, I don't know, do you like Counterspells and Lightning Bolt? Do you like Ponder and Preordain? I think once you start naming some of the commons that have been printed over the years, and of course I give a bunch of blue and red ones, people will realize, what are the other side of this coin is you start talking to someone about Pauper, and they're like, oh my god, Lightning Bolt is a common? Like they've never thought about it before. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think that's part of it. There are objectively powerful cards in this, and I think also something that this brings up is the idea of it being like draft chaff. And I think one of the things that people need to recognize is with the institution of the NWO, the New World Order, when it comes to card design, a lot of archetypes in Limited don't have payoffs at common. Most of the time your payoffs sit at the uncommon slot. That's where a lot of the power has been sunk these days in terms of Limited formats.
And I would say that to a certain extent, even uncommons are even on parity with rares, older rares at this point.
Oh, definitely. Like the average power level of an uncommon now is leagues past where it used to be. And I think one of the interesting things is we don't tend to see engine cards anymore. And if you look at the average Pauper deck, most of the time, instead of looking for draft archetypes that you think would be like cool to build a deck around in a constructed format, look at recurring Limited archetypes. So I'm going to use the example of Blue-Red Blitz. Blue-Red Blitz actually takes cards from multiple different Limited environments and combines them in a way which would have been sweet to play in Limited, but it's kind of this density thing where Kiln Fiend was part of a Spells Matter archetype, as was Nivix Cyclops. And then you're adding in free spells, both in the form of things like Gush from the Masks block.
They think commons aren't powerful. Tell them about Gush.
Yeah, I know. Gush is a silly card that should never have probably been printed. But and in addition to Gush, it's also playing stuff like Gataxian Probe, which is another type of free spell. So if you look at some of these decks, like most decks actually pull from a variety of blocks. And I think that's something that's kind of neat to see, is that outside of a handful of examples, like I'm thinking Elves is a great example where a good chunk of that came from the Onslaught block, and Affinity, where a good chunk of that came from the original Mirrodin block. But outside of those, a lot of these decks, the individual component parts come from very different areas. And I think one of the things I do want to mention here is like all of these cards by and large were draft chaff for a long time, and I think that I don't want to like completely discourage that idea of like taking different parts that kind of synergize together and trying to make that work. But in terms of like impressing people of the power level, like what is it? Tribe can legitimately have a turn 2 kill. Like if you just have it, like you just have it, and there's nothing your opponent can really do about it. And I think talking to them about that and showing them some of the more interesting effects that are at common, like there's the obvious ones, the blue cantrips are all legal, and that's like a nice way to like demonstrate that or whatever. But also talking about that power level, talking about like the fact that there's a Tron deck that isn't just ramming big stupid things onto the board as quickly as possible. There's like a controlled Tron deck that plays mystical teachings and like a bunch of weird instants from throughout Magic's history. I think does a much better job of illustrating the sort of diversity and complexity of some of these decks than just sort of defaulting to going, well, we got Preordained, Brainstorm, and Ponder, so like clearly a powerful format.
No, dude, my answer is right.
I mean, we both have different approaches to a vast variety of things in life, so I think it's okay if we disagree on this. I did actually see just today a tweet from someone who I'm going to totally blank on who they were, who was saying that they think that the big thing that could propel Pauper into a more public eye is for the and I always forget what this format's called. The one that you went to play in Kyoto. What is that format called? The team. Oh, is it just team constructed?
Yeah, team constructed.
Okay, so right now that's a format where one player plays Legacy, one player plays Standard, one player plays Modern. And what this person was proposing was if Pauper took the place of Legacy in that style of event, that would be one of its paths to like full-blown legitimacy in the wider public eye.
And the thing is, it very well might have to. I mean, have you seen the price of reserve list cards? Like, Legacy's in trouble, and I know people have been saying that for a really long time, so don't get me wrong. I'm really not trying to be alarmist, but the prices are just out of control, and it's quickly becoming a format that you can't just get into. You either have to already have the cards, you have to have a friend with the cards, or you have to drop a huge chunk of change. It's not becoming it's very inaccessible. So I would love to see something like that. I actually do like Legacy quite a bit as a format. I like it a lot better than Modern or Standard. But it's just the cost is so high these days that you really got to know someone. I'm fortunate enough to know some people, so.
Yeah, it's one of those things where outside of a handful of lists, the prices for Legacy cards are almost always going to go up unless the reserve list magically vanishes, and I'm not holding my breath for that.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that's the solution. I don't know what the solution is. This is bigger minds than ours have probably tried to tackle this and have, in various forums. I just mean there's just no easy fix for the Legacy situation. But I would love to see Pauper take the place of Legacy at some of these events, because you're right. I think that could very much make it become part of the more mainstream.
Well, I mean, it also just makes those events more accessible to the general populace. For example, one of those GPs, like as you said, like you know someone who you managed to borrow pieces for a Legacy deck from, but if
not
you
just
didn't,
everyone's gonna let you take $6,000 worth of cards to Japan. By the way, y'all.
Yeah, like that's that's a very high level of trust. So I could actually see that being a great tactical move from Wizards' perspective as well. It just, like, the pros have access to these things. Obviously, most of them are financially secure enough that Legacy is not, a huge financial burden. And it would be interesting because that easily halves the cost of those events in terms of deck building. It, like, the difference between the Legacy decks, like, I don't even want to know what lands is worth at this point. Like, I just straight up don't want to know.
Oh, okay, never mind.
No.
$6,000. It's $6,000, Mike.
What?
Well, Tabernacle has just ballooned.
Yeah, so I think if that was something that WotC wanted to do, and I don't think it would be like a huge change in terms of the complexity of those events. I think that would be a really interesting decision on their part that would put more eyes on the format. So
Tabernacle is $3,000, Mike.
Oh no, that's just like stressful to hear out loud.
Do you know how much Drop of Honey is now?
That one's close to $1,000, right?
It's 800.
Yeah. All right. Legacy, very expensive, folks.
You know how much a playset of Mox Diamonds is?
Like a playset of them, probably close to 800 as well.
It's $1,000.
Wow. Just wow. All right.
So yeah, you really have to have already owned the cards or know someone.
Yeah, so I think that's one of the possible ends, but until something like that happens, you can show people deck lists, and I think that's one of the best ways to kind of approach a format like this instead of being, from a personal standpoint. I know you obviously brought up the example of just bringing up powerful cards. I like to see a deck list to kind of, I guess, convince me, or even some gameplay. Like, there are great Pauper content channels out there that showcase interesting decks, and you can see people piloting them. And I think the moment someone actually gets a chance to see what these decks look like, it's a much better convincer than just going, well, it's a good format, you should play it. So I guess that's how I'd tackle it. I don't generally get those comments much anymore. I don't know. I don't generally see that issue, especially because there's a local store here that does pauper events, and where Adrian lives as well, there's local stores that do pauper events. I think we've gotten to the point where we're getting pretty close to catching on, but there's always room for growth, right?
No. Yes.
There's always room for growth, both personal and I don't know what other adjective I'm going to use here, but I think I don't know. Is there anything else that you think could be used as a convincer for people who are unsold on the format?
I think those are the two strongest arguments. The easiest one you can do, deck lists. I sort of springboarding off of that, letting people know they can play most archetypes in Pauper. Do you play elves? Well, you probably play Pauper elves. It's the same thing.
Yeah. I do think one other thing that could help as a convincer, and this is, I guess, perhaps not the greatest way to go about it. You could tell people, like, you can get in fairly cheap now, and these staples just keep rising. So if this takes off, you can get in at the ground floor. So I guess I'm advocating.
Yeah.
I guess I'm advocating the mid-level marketing approach to things and scamming people into playing Pauper. But that is a possibility. I'm not going to say it's impossible.
At the end of the day, there are some people who are just going to try and rain on your parade, though. Like, there's some people I've been trying to get into Pauper for a while. They're just not interested. And, you can't bother with those people.
Yeah. At the end of the day, people are going to like what they like, and you can't force someone to care about something. And, yeah, obviously, it's always a bummer when the people you like to play Magic with don't want to play Magic the way that you want to. But at some point, there's no convincing people. Like, I tossed together a Brawl deck the other week, and I've had a ton of fun with the format. There are other people who just, like, either don't care or are violently against it as a format existing. And I don't know. I think it's a fun little, like, time waster in between rounds, and I think it's cool for that. But there are going to be people who just don't agree with that position, and that's totally okay. It's all right to have differing opinions. That's part of being people. And yeah, I don't know. I think those are the best convincers that we have out there. And obviously, actually, I guess this kind of dovetails. Adrian, do you have any updates about our video series, our gameplay series?
Oh, yes. The promised yet not yet delivered upon gameplay series. Yes, we had some technical issues the other night when we first tried to record. Learned a lot. We bought a GoPro, so we're hoping that's going to help with some of the camera work issues we had. So we're hoping to get together. I guess by the time you've listened to this, we'll have gotten together yesterday. It'll be Saturday. Try and record some videos, so we'll see how that goes, and I'll definitely keep everyone posted.
Yeah, and I don't know if we've covered this on the show yet, but I think our goal with this video series, in addition to providing you wonderful fans with some great content, is to get some really good commentary from players and kind of provide not just surface level discussions about games, but kind of try to go a little bit more in depth. So hopefully moving forward, that will be one of those resources where we don't just go, hey, go online. There's a bunch of people who make videos for Pauper. We can actually point towards something that we've produced and be like, here, there's a thing. We make it. It's pretty good. You can use this as your, like, convincer if you so choose. But I'm really excited for this series. Adrian has put in a ton of work for it already. So even the footage that was declined, I was pretty excited about it. Hopefully is going to be a really, really cool series.
Maybe it was good. It wasn't that good. Don't worry. No one worry about it. It wasn't that good.
It wasn't perfect, but seeing even just like the proof of concept got me super excited for it. And I'm really excited for it to come up in the following weeks. I will be out of town, as I mentioned at the very beginning of the show, so maybe Adrian will have something up while I'm out of town for you folks. And
we're hoping.
We're hoping. But yeah. All right. So we talked Paupergeddon. We talked Dispelling Myths of Pauper. We talked about upcoming neat things for the channel. Do you have anything else for the folks today, Adrian, or do you want to take us out of the show?
I'll take us out of the show. everyone, thank you for joining us today. This podcast is brought to you by the support of our patrons, including the one who submitted our conversation topic today, Josiah Groy. Sorry if I said that wrong. Thank you so much for being a contributor. You've been a big fan of ours since basically the beginning. So really, really thank you. You have definitely made a lot of this stuff possible. And much like him, consider supporting us if you like the show. You can check below this video or the description of this podcast for details on where to find us. We'd like to remind you, if you listen to this on a platform with reviews, they're always appreciated because they boost our visibility. Furthermore, if you've got a deck list or an idea for a topic, you can contact us either via our website or by emailing us directly at colorcommentary@gmail.com. To all of you who have emailed, I do get your emails. I am waiting to aggregate your questions into a single mailbag episode, perhaps. A lot of them are very good questions, and I definitely want to address them. I just want you to know when you shoot it off into the aether, I do get them. Special thanks to Pat's Games, my LGS, and Mike's LGS, JP Comics, and of course L. He does our theme song. You can find our theme song Quantitative, and other great tracks over at soundcloud.net/ELLELLELL. So next week, this is Adrian and Mike, and we are signing off. For Color Commentary.